Money FM 89.3, the best of the afternoon update.
Money FM 89.3. The World Health Organization estimates that between 2015 and 2050, the proportion of the world's population over 60 will nearly double from 12 to 22%. In most organizations, 4 generations are often working together. You have the Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and the Baby Boomers. The benefits of a generationally diverse workforce outweigh the potential drawbacks. Multiple generation promote the sharing of different perspectives, aiding innovation and problem solving. However, as different generations work together, organizations are bound to face certain challenges, such as fostering collaboration. So how can businesses unlock the value and productivity in Asia-Pacific's multi-generational workforce to address skill shortages and age diversity? And what is the role of technology in bridging the multi-generational gap? I'm so pleased to have my guest today join me to share his insights. He is Simon Tate, Asia Pacific President with Workday, which is a leading provider of enterprise cloud applications for finance and human resources. Good afternoon, Simon.
Good afternoon, Lindley. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you too. Now, Simon, this couldn't be more timely, this topic. I have a Gen Zer who has just joined me as a producer for my show. It's her first week with us, so I'm really counting on you for some solid advice.
Well, watch out for those Gen Zs, Lindley. But, if you think the Gen Zs are full of energy, wait for Gen Alpha. Gen Alpha is 3 to 4 years away from entering the full-time workplace. And this will be the first time, this is fascinating, the first time ever that we will have 5 generations in the workplace together. There's a huge productivity unlock to be had if we can foster that intergenerational or that cross-generational collaboration. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, the baby boomers are staying on much longer. They're fitter, they're more active, they're healthier, they want to continue to make a contribution. And of course, the Gen Alphas, the eldest of which are now about 14 or 15, will come into the workplace in just a few years.
I don't even want to think about that yet, because I read recently that for the first time in history, like you mentioned, baby boomers, they've been overtaken by members of Gen Z now. No, Gen Z now outnumber them in the workforce. I mean, talk about generational shifts. There are certainly wide-ranging implications here, aren't there?
There are, and the productivity uplift is something that in all of the executives I've spoken to around the region, in particular in Singapore. By the way, this productivity issue is much more acute in Singapore. In fact, the recent Manpower survey of executives in Singapore quoted business leaders, 80% of which said that they are suffering from a skills shortage. The global average is about 75%. So in a labour-tight environment like Singapore, this notion of a skills shortage is going to become further exacerbated. Now, there's a contradiction here. On one side, we're saying we've got the benefit of a 5-generation workplace, and on the other, we're saying that we have a productivity lull. Why is that the case? Well, there are a couple of things to take into consideration here. One is the huge advancement in tech. Another is a mismatch on education and curriculum versus the skills that companies will need to sustain any degree of competitive differentiation over the next 5 to 10 years. And the other, probably most interesting part of this is a huge demographic shift, in particular an ageing population. Now, when you consider Gen Alpha, and your Gen Z, Lindley, is somewhat of a proxy for what to expect with Gen Alpha, but this generation will not be loyal. They'll be quite fickle.
Aww.
Massive social conscience. They subscribe to the gig economy. They'll have 3 or 4 careers. They won't sign up to a company and have any expectation of staying for 4 or 5 or certainly not 10 or 15 years. So business leaders really need to think about the future of their workplace, because in just a few years they'll be grappling with this intergenerational challenge that no previous business leader has needed to deal with.
You're so right, Simon. You know, all these generations in the workforce, each with unique characteristics, worldviews and values. So how can we find an inclusive path forward?
We need to look at inverting the traditional hierarchy, move away from qualifications and what I would call linear career progression, and to focus on a more subterranean skills base, if you like. And what I mean by that is if you look at the biggest companies in Singapore, how many of those companies would have a 20-something-year-old on their board or a 20-something-year-old even on their advisory boards? The answer is very few, potentially zero. That's fascinating and terrifying, because there's an unlock of skills in this younger generation that could definitely help, in particular in the age of digital and AI. Generation Alpha will come into the workplace with a higher degree of digital fluency than all of the other four generations combined. And yet business leaders, certainly those that I'm talking to, I don't think are being deliberate enough about tapping into this new and imminently arriving skills base. So we need to look at that traditional corporate hierarchy, one that rewards life and professional tenure, and turn it upside down and really think differently around how we capture some of these skills, in particular the digital skills of the younger generation. So that's one thing. The other thing is, how do we as business leaders attract and retain this new generation of talent who frankly will be spoiled for choice? They will have more choice than any other generation in terms of the company and the profile of company that they want to work for.
Okay. And what about technology? What role does it play in terms of bridging this multi-generational gap?
Well, I'm Gen X, and I remember doing my year one college paper on my grandmother's digital typewriter, which then I thought was groundbreaking. My kids that are now 19 and 17, I'm convinced use ChatGPT to get through high school. So in just 20 years, which in the workplace is considered two generations, we've seen such an enormous technology shift. And this is a default orientation towards things like AI, in particular generative AI. Now, the benefit of that, of course, is you could foster what we call reverse mentoring. So many business leaders that I talk to are used to the concept of mentoring, but it's mainly the older generation mentoring the new generation. Well, why don't we turn that upside down as well and start looking at reverse mentoring, where some of this younger generation coming into the workplace can really help with technology adoption and creating the technology orientation to be more operationally effective. That will produce a level of productivity unlock, which every executive that I talk to is really struggling with. Think about a tightening labour market, a difficult macroeconomic environment, a difficult and forever changing political environment with an ageing population. We really need to get serious about the skills economy, and this new generation of skills coming through could be the difference maker.
Let's talk more about that. To avoid the widening skills gap, what should businesses be doing?
Accelerating investment in learning and development is very high on the corporate agenda, and I would hope would continue to be over the next few years. Keeping up with technology advancements is something that boards need to be very deliberate about. It's fascinating. Most technology refresh programs are still 10 to 15 year scopes of work. That's crazy when you think about how quickly technology is advancing. Technology refreshes now need to be 3 to 5 years, not 10 to 15. One of the most interesting parts of this survey, in particular those that responded from Gen Alpha and Gen Z, was their expectation coming into the workforce, Lindley, is that the corporate applications they use need to look and feel like the applications they use on their smartphones. Now, I know that is just not the case. There is still a huge difference in legacy technology usage amongst most corporates, and a chasm of expectation on this younger generation about what sort of applications they'll use when they come into the workplace. This, I think, will be an artificial accelerant of business users to look much more deliberately at the technology refresh programs, and instead of looking at a 10 to 15 year window, look at a 3 to 5 year window. The beauty of things like cloud technology, being able to put your financial and employee assets in the cloud, is it affords every business, whether you're an SMB or a mid-market or a large enterprise, the ability to adopt the same level of technology innovation as your bigger peer group and to really get ahead of that technology refresh cycle. So that would be my advice. Let's accelerate learning and development budgets. Let's get serious about reverse mentoring and inverting that traditional, and I would argue now stale, corporate hierarchy that rewards life and professional tenure over skills, in particular digital skills. And let's look at an accelerant for technology refresh programs in organizations such that they can compete for this new talent. And because, as we know, it's traditionally been the case that larger companies are spoilt for choice in terms of the people that they can hire. We need to level the playing field and make sure that small business, in particular in Singapore, which, as you know, is about 50% of Singapore's GDP, come from companies with fewer than 200 employees. It's really important that that segment have the ability to attract and retain talent the same as the big companies do.
Simon, I'm just curious to know, how are all these developments impacting the kind of work that you do at Workday? Workday being a leading provider of enterprise cloud applications for finance and human resources.
Well, we're often asked, Lindley, to look at our data. We have two of the richest data sets in the world, that being finance data and employee data. We're often asked to look at our data and make some extrapolations or projections on what the future of work would look like. Now, we obviously already provide a lot of analytics. What this survey and others will prompt is a skills heat map. So in an environment where you can no longer throw more people at the problem, you have to look at your existing people and figure out what subterranean skills already exist. What's really interesting about this is most of the programs of work and key strategic initiatives that executives talk about, they already have the skills to fulfill internally. They just don't know that they exist. So what Workday can help do with Skills Cloud is capture those skills and allow employees across any of the 5 generations to participate in programs of work that have laid dormant. So think about a 19, 20, 21-year-old who may have had their own e-commerce business selling product online during COVID. That's a really important skill that needs to be applied in a particular program of work in a big corporate, but may not have been published as part of the job description for the role that they currently have. So the opportunity here is to lift productivity without necessarily adding more people. There's an opportunity to do that, but you can only do that if you know where those innate skills currently reside in your organization. So the great thing about having access to this rich data set of finance and employee data is it allows companies to generate this heat map of skills. And then if there's a particular program, a particular initiative, you can look to the organization and say, hey, why don't you 10 people that we've identified as potentially having the skills to help us with this, come on board and help us with this as a stretch assignment. It keeps employees happy, engaged, gives them some diversity. It's a deviation away from their primary remit. And of course, keeps them interested, which in turn makes retaining that talent much easier. And of course, it costs less. The cost of having to compete for labour in a tight market is very expensive, in particular for small business.
Before we let you go, what are the key developments in HR tech trends we can expect to see in 2025?
Well, there's a lot happening around AI, and that makes sense. There has been a huge hype cycle as it relates in particular to the monetization of artificial intelligence. At Workday, we've had AI embedded into our HR and finance platform since birth. So we're well across the developments in artificial intelligence, but how AI would play out in real life scenarios as it relates to the future of work and more broadly around HR trends. Let me give you a couple of examples. We spoke briefly around the skills heat map. How do you identify what skills may already innately exist within an organisation to allow an uplift in productivity? That can't happen without the effective use of artificial intelligence. So what AI can do is in real time look at your complete organisational structure and start to do some predictive analysis and offer up some recommendations on span and control, role changes, stretch assignments, what skills are being overutilised versus underutilised, which people or cohorts or demographics are not being utilised to their full potential, and the list goes on and on. So if you apply all of these use cases that up to this point would have required heavy labour from a big team of HR professionals and lots of manual spreadsheeting, all of these things now can be completely automated. So I think the future of HR tech will be defined predominantly by the use of AI, in particular machine learning and generative AI. You can apply the same principles to the first part of a onboarding process, which is the development of a job description. We can automatically generate a job description based on previous job descriptions, how those jobs have morphed over the years, and of course, changing expectations in salaries, work conditions, work from home, policies. All of that previously manual and labour-intensive work now can be almost completely automated. The idea here, and something that's often lost in the theme of AI, Lin-Lee, is our motivation is to improve human productivity and to make sure that technology, and particularly technologies like AI, are really aiding executives in being able to lift productivity. Every executive struggles with being able to lift productivity. And 10, 15 years ago, how did you lift productivity? You just threw more people at the problem. In other words, the answer to productivity was add capacity. That principle no longer applies. You can't lift productivity by simply adding capacity. You have to lift productivity by extracting more yield, and that means making people's jobs easier so that they have more time to focus on higher value activities. And with that means automating a lot of those previously manual tasks. So HR tech, by the way, is not the only tech stream that will benefit from automation. There are lots of parts of the technology stack that are embracing AI en masse to really underpin this key theme, which is an executive mandate. It's one of the top 3 things that every executive talks about, is how do we, over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, maintain competitive differentiation and lift yield. And yield means how do we give more revenue without necessarily adding to our cost base. And the largest and most expensive part for most companies on their P&L is people. So it's all about productivity, and it's all around using AI to make sure that we can aid in that productivity uplift.
Simon, I'm afraid we've run out of time, but wow, there's so much leaders have to deal with. Better understand generations, varying values, new technology involving the whole organization, and thrive amid all of this. Thank you so much for your insights today. Simon Tate, Asia Pacific President with Enterprise Cloud Applications Provider, Workday. Thank you.
Thanks, Lin-Lee.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.